Her dream was buried for years, until a stranger handed her a key. Welcome to our storytelling channel, where every day a new story touches the heart and sparks the soul. If you enjoyed today's tale, we'd love to know. Where in the world are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below so we can see how far our stories travel. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you won't miss tomorrow's special story. It's one you won't want to miss. Thank you for being part of this journey with us. Emily Carter was only 6 years old when her mother brought home a small plastic case of colored pencils from the dollar store. To anyone else, they were just ordinary crayons. But to Emily, they were magic. In her tiny bedroom tucked inside a worn-out house on the edge of rural Ohio, she took every blank piece of paper she could find and turned it into a portal to another world. She drew animals she had never seen in real life: elephants, lions, peacocks, sometimes with wings or wearing hats. She sketched the people waiting at the bus stop across the street, the woman with a red scarf, the old man who always carried a folded newspaper. Her walls became her gallery, covered in a patchwork of colors and dreams. Her parents, Margaret and Thomas Carter, worked hard. Too hard, really. Her mother cleaned houses from sunrise to sunset, while her father switched between late-night shifts at the steel mill and odd handyman jobs. They were good people, kind-hearted and steady, but life had taught them to be practical. Money was always tight, and at the end of each month the fridge looked more like a shelf of forgotten leftovers than a place for nourishment. Thomas used to shake his head whenever he saw Emily curled up on the floor, pencils in hand, completely absorbed in a world of her own making. "Art doesn't pay the rent, kid," he'd mutter, his voice roughened by years of cigarette smoke and cold winters. "You need to study something that'll keep food on the table." At school, her teachers noticed her gift. One even pulled her parents aside, showing them a drawing Emily had done of the local playground, capturing not just the scenery, but the emotion on the children's faces. "She has something special," the teacher said gently. "There are scholarships at the Art Institute in Columbus." But the response was always the same. "We can't take that kind of risk," her mother said, folding her hands tightly in her lap. "She needs a real future, one with security." And so, Emily learned early that dreams, at least the colorful kind, had to be tucked away. She stopped bringing her drawings to school. She told people she wanted to go into business or accounting, whatever sounded safe. But at night, long after the TV had gone silent and the house was dark, she would still pull out her sketch pad, drawing by the soft light of a desk lamp, whispering her dreams to the paper. No one ever told her how heavy it could feel to carry a gift the world didn't want you to use. But she carried it anyway, quietly, carefully, hoping that one day she might find a place where her colors could finally belong. By the time Emily Carter turned 24, her childhood drawings were packed away in a shoebox at the back of her closet, next to old notebooks, faded report cards, and the part of her heart that still believed in magic. Instead of art school, she had chosen a safe path, one paved with spreadsheets, deadlines, and quarterly reports. She now worked in the financial department of a rising tech company in downtown Cincinnati. The building was modern, sleek, all glass and metal. From her cubicle, she could see the Ohio River stretching out like a moving painting, but she rarely looked up long enough to enjoy the view. Her days were a blur of emails, budget reviews, and back-to-back meetings. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above her, and the corporate language around her felt like a foreign tongue, full of phrases like streamlining operations and Q4 deliverables. Emily wore fitted blouses, muted tones, and kept her hair tied back. She smiled when expected, nodded in agreement, and never, ever mentioned the sketches she still sometimes did in the margins of her planner. But during her lunch breaks, something changed. While others rushed to eat in the break room or scrolled through their phones, Emily slipped outside to the company garden, a quiet little patch of green surrounded by towering concrete. There, she would sit alone on a bench, a small notepad tucked in her lap, and draw. She sketched the way the sun reflected off the glass buildings, the fluttering of leaves in the wind, or the profile of a stranger walking by. One day, as she was shading the wings of a pigeon mid-flight, she sensed someone behind her. A warm voice, gravelly and low, broke the silence. "You've got the gift," the man said. Emily looked up, startled. It was George Wallace, the building's janitor. He wore a gray uniform that was always clean and pressed, and his eyes, though framed by deep wrinkles, held a quiet wisdom. At first, their conversations were brief, a few words here, a smile there, but over time they began to talk more, about art, about life, and about a woman named Eleanor. Eleanor had been George's wife. She painted too. On weekends, she turned their basement into a studio. She used to say painting wasn't a choice, George told her one day. It was the only way she could breathe. Emily felt a lump form in her throat. She understood that feeling all too well, the way something inside you aches when you're not creating. And yet, she still convinced herself she was doing the right thing. She had bills to pay, rent to make. Art was for people who had a safety net. George never pushed her. He just listened. And in a world that moved too fast and felt too shallow, that simple act meant everything. What Emily didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that this quiet friendship was about to become the turning point in her life. It was a rainy Tuesday morning in March when everything unraveled. Emily Carter had barely taken a sip of her coffee when the email hit her inbox. Mandatory meeting, finance team. 10 hours a.m., conference room B. She felt a chill run through her, not from the cold, but from the silence that followed in the office. People whispered, eyes darted. There was talk of restructuring again, the kind that came fast and without mercy. Still, Emily tried to shake it off. She was never late, never missed a deadline. She stayed quiet, did her job, didn't rock the boat. Surely she'd be fine. At exactly 10 a.m., the room was packed. Glass walls surrounded the space, giving outsiders a clear view into the anxiety side. Victor Langston, the department head, walked in wearing his usual smug expression. 2 HR reps followed close behind. His tone was flat, robotic. "As you all know, the company is undergoing strategic realignment," he began. "Unfortunately, some roles have been deemed redundant." Emily barely heard the rest. Her pulse pounded in her ears. Then her name sliced through the room like a knife. "Emily Carter, after a thorough performance review, we've determined that your position is no longer aligned with company objectives. Your contract will be terminated effective today." The words hung in the air like smoke. For a moment, no one moved. No one said a word, not even Emily. Her face flushed hot with embarrassment. Her hands trembled slightly. Around her, co-workers avoided eye contact, whispering behind hands. The same people she'd shared coffee breaks and group chats with now acted like they barely knew her. "You may collect your belongings," Victor added, already moving on to the next item like he was reading from a weather report. She walked out of the room on legs that felt like lead. At her desk, a cardboard box had already been placed there by someone. Pens, photo frames, a half-wilted pothos plant, and at the bottom, her sketch pad, the one she hadn't touched in weeks. Holding the box tightly, she made her way to the elevator, eyes fixed straight ahead. The hall felt longer than usual, the fluorescent lights a little too bright. And then, at the far end, she saw him. George Wallace stood by his cleaning cart, as steady as ever. When their eyes met, she tried to smile. It crumbled almost instantly. He didn't speak at first. He simply walked up, extended his calloused hand, and placed something in her palm. A small, worn brass key. "It's time," he said softly, but with purpose. Emily blinked. "Time for what?" "To breathe, kid. Like Eleanor used to say." He handed her a folded piece of paper with an address scribbled in pen. 221 Maple Lane. "That studio's been empty a long time," he said. "It's been waiting for someone like you." Emily stood frozen, staring at the key in her hand, the rain tapping against the glass windows behind her. Everything she thought was secure had just collapsed. But in that moment, she realized something. Maybe this was the door she was always meant to walk through. That night, after hours of silence, tears, and an empty takeout container left untouched on the kitchen counter, Emily Carter grabbed the key. The storm had settled into a soft drizzle as she drove through the quiet streets of the suburbs. The address George gave her, 221 Maple Lane, led to a small single-story home with a well-tended garden and a wooden plaque nailed above the door. The number, slightly faded, still stood proud. She stepped out of the car, heart pounding, key clenched in her palm. She wasn't sure what she was expecting. Maybe cobwebs, dust, a cold space long forgotten. But when the lock clicked open and she pushed the door to the side studio, she felt something else entirely. Warmth, not from heat, but from presence. The room was about 12 feet by 14 feet, lit by tall windows that stretched toward the ceiling. Faded curtains let in the moonlight. Easels stood like silent sentinels beneath cloth covers. Jars of dried paint lined the shelves, some still sealed. A sewing machine rested in the corner, surrounded by bundles of untouched fabric. It was as if someone had simply stepped out and never returned. Emily slowly peeled back one of the cloths, revealing a sturdy wooden easel, worn smooth at the edges. Beneath the work table, she found a stack of blank canvases and a box of charcoal that, despite the years, still felt like it belonged in her hand. Her fingers trembled as she opened her sketch pad, old pages filled with half-finished dreams. She reached for a charcoal stick, and then she drew. She didn't think, didn't plan. The lines flowed from her like breath, swift, certain, as if her hands had been waiting for this moment to remember what they were made for. When she stepped back hours later, her face was streaked with charcoal, her hands stained black, and yet she felt cleaner than she had in years. Over the next few weeks, Emily returned every day. With a modest severance check and about $3,000 in savings, she bought what she needed: new paints, brushes, light bulbs, and a space heater. She spent her mornings sketching, afternoons painting, and evenings battling the voices in her head that told her this wouldn't last. The fear never really left her. Every time she opened a bill or checked her bank app, it whispered again, "What if this is a mistake? What if you fail?" But the joy, the freedom of creating without permission or apology, that voice was louder now. George visited often, bringing coffee or leftover cookies from the downstairs cafe. He never stayed long, but always asked to see her newest piece. One day, he brought his niece. She saw a portrait Emily had done of a child and asked if she'd do one of her newborn son. It wasn't much, just a 16 by 20-inch canvas, but she paid for it. And in that moment, something shifted. Someone had paid her not out of pity, but because they saw value in her art. And for the first time, Emily wondered, not if she could do this, but what else might be possible if she dared to believe it. 2 years passed like brushstrokes across a canvas, some bold, some delicate, but each one filled with intention. Emily Carter was no longer the woman who clutched a cardboard box and walked out of a glass tower with trembling hands. The studio on Maple Lane had become her sanctuary, her battlefield, and her rebirth. What once smelled of dust and forgotten memories now carried the scent of fresh paint, ink, and something else: hope. She lived modestly, but she lived freely. Commissions rolled in: children's book illustrations, family portraits, cafe murals, even the occasional custom piece for weddings or anniversaries. Her name began to circulate in local galleries and online forums. She was no longer the girl who used to work finance. She was Emily Carter, the artist. But even as success trickled in, she never forgot the man who handed her the key to this life, literally and metaphorically. George Wallace remained her quiet anchor. He never took credit, never asked for thanks. But Emily knew, without that key, without that moment in the hallway, none of this would have happened. So she began planning something. Not a thank you card, not a dinner. Something that would speak the language they both understood. She found the photo buried in the back of a drawer beneath old sketch pads and spare canvases. It was yellowed with time, slightly torn at the corners. In it, George and his late wife Eleanor stood side by side at a lake. They were probably in their 40s. She had a paintbrush in hand. He had his arm around her waist. The way they looked, at each other. It told a whole story. Emily scanned the image, studied their expressions, and began sketching. For weeks, she worked in secret between commissions. She imagined what they'd look like today, older but still together. Eleanor with white curls tucked behind her ears, George's laugh lines deeper, their hands still entwined. The finished painting was a 24x 36-inch oil portrait. It showed them sitting on a bench by that same lake, aged gracefully, the sun setting behind them. A life they might have had if time had been kinder. One Saturday afternoon, she invited George over. He came, as he often did, with a coffee in one hand and a quiet smile on his face. "I've got something for you," she said, leading him into the back room. She pulled the cloth off the painting. George froze, his eyes welled up, his lips parted. But no words came. For several long moments, he just stared. Then his voice cracked, low and full of disbelief. "How did you—" "I found the photo," Emily said softly. "The rest was imagination and gratitude." He stepped forward and gently touched the corner of the frame, as if afraid it might disappear. "You didn't just paint a picture," he whispered. "You gave me back a piece of her." Emily smiled, her hands speckled with dried paint. "You gave me a life," she replied. And in that quiet studio, where 2 generations of artists had found their breath again, Emily Carter finally understood. The right door doesn't just open. It waits. But you have to be brave enough to walk through it. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Have you ever walked away from something secure to follow a dream that others didn't understand? Or maybe there's a part of you that still holds on to a quiet passion, waiting for the right moment to come alive again. We want this space to be more than just a place to listen. We want it to be a place where your voice matters too. Tell us where you're watching from, what part of the story moved you most, or even share your own experience of finding purpose after feeling lost. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to read today. And if there's someone in your life like George, someone who believed in you when you forgot how to believe in yourself, tag them or tell us about them. Let's celebrate the people who hold out the keys when we're too afraid to ask for doors. Your comment isn't just feedback. It's a connection. A reminder that stories, when shared, can create something real between strangers. So take a moment and let us know you're here. We're listening.